Yeah, the title of my book is West Texas, A History of the Giant Side of the State. It's an edited work with a friend of mine, Bruce Glassrud, and we have a number of local historians who have written about it, local and regional historians who are all pretty much experts on the field. The book's divided into 4 parts: on place, on people, on politics and economics, and on social and cultural aspects. And then those 4 parts are divided into separate chapters, about 5 in each part. West Texas is often hard to define. Geographically, it's hard to define because the definition has shifted over the years. Traditionally, it was west of Fort Worth after the Civil War. But you can't include Fort Worth hardly in West Texas anymore. It's too sophisticated, too cosmopolitan for West Texas. But anyway, geographically it shifts. And now it runs somewhere west of Fort Worth to, of course, the New Mexico border. Usually it doesn't include far West Texas, the Big Bend and El Paso region. We included that in our book. The environment in West Texas pretty much dominates the region. That might be true of all areas, but certainly the environment in West Texas dominates it. And in our book, the theme of environment seems to appear in most of the chapters. The environment is arid or semi-arid, or as Chambers of Commerce would say, subhumid. But also it's a region of wind and well, dust in our area. Not so much in Amarillo. There isn't much dust up there because they don't farm cotton. Here we raise cotton, so the environment has a lot of dust in this area and wind. So the environment is semi-arid, it's windy, it lacks rainfall, it suffers from extensive periods of drought. We have these periods of a few years of wet and then several years of dry. And when we talk about average yearly rainfall of about 18 inches in Lubbock, well, we've got plenty of years of 13 or 9 and other years of 25. Well, some of the first settlers who came out here, they came in one of those wet cycles where the rainfall was 25 inches. Oh, wow, this is a wonderful place, you know. And they rode home and people came out, and then came a dry cycle and people were hurt. Another part of the environment, I guess, is the oil, the whole idea of oil. The whole West Texas is permeated with oil, though we've taken most of it out of the ground, I suspect. But the Panhandle has a big oil boom right here in the city of Lubbock. We've got oil wells. And then the Permian Basin, south of here in the Odessa Midland area, that is a huge oil region. The people of West Texas are culturally diverse. In fact, all of West Texas is culturally diverse. But look, people were living in West Texas as early as 12,000 years ago, and there's plenty of evidence up in this area of the High Plains. There's evidence in the Big Bend country. They were hunters and gatherers for the most part. Clovis people, we call them now, and Folsom people. And they dominated the region for a long time, but eventually they merged into other groups, their societies changed, and they shifted, and of course time passed. Well, Europeans first arrived, I suppose we would say, with Francisco Coronado, who came to New Mexico and then this way looking for gold in the so-called 7 cities of Cibola, which were cities of gold. And his reports of the West Texas plains talked about the deep grass and water and how cattle could be raised. He talked about buffalo and called them cows, and that attracted plenty of people to the West Texas area. Hispanics didn't settle here in those days after Francisco Coronado because he didn't find gold. And then Comanches came into the area. Apaches first, then Comanches. In fact, Apaches and Comanches had a long war to settle who was going to dominate the region. Comanches finally brushed Apaches aside. There are some Apaches in the mountains, and there were some Apaches that went into northern Mexico, but it became Comancheria, the home of the Comanches. And then Anglos began coming into West Texas. And now came a long war, a half century, from about 1825 to about 1875, Comanches trying to hold on to their territory, and Anglos trying to usurp some of that Comanche territory. And that struggle impacted the character, I think, of both the Indians and the Anglos, because it was a war of attrition. It was a bitter struggle. People were kidnapped on both sides. Of course, a lot of people killed on both sides, and it didn't end until in the 1870s. Well, then Anglos came in, and they came in different kind of waves. I indicated earlier that cotton agriculture came west from East Texas and the Old South. Settlers in the Panhandle, the first settlers there came from the Midwest. They brought different traditions with them. But look, there were plenty of Hispanics around who worked on the ranches. There were plenty of African Americans around who worked on these ranches, especially after the Civil War. Some people say as many as 40% of the Western cowboys who went up the trail from Texas to Abilene and Dodge City were made up of African American cowboys who, with nothing to do or with efforts to try to escape the Old South, they came west, caught on as cowboys, and some of them became successful ranchers. Look, during the Civil War, Texas cattle were ignored, and so they expanded, naturally expanded. There were huge numbers of them. Well, it was quickly found by some entrepreneurs that they could buy cattle in Texas for about $4 a head and sell them in Chicago, and St. Louis, Kansas City, Cincinnati, the meatpacking towns, for about $25 a head or more. Well, it didn't take a genius to figure out that if we can get those cattle north to markets, we can make money. And so the long drives were held. Well, eventually, farmers pushed into cattle country, and farmer stockmen who would raise a few acres of corn or wheat or cotton and raise cattle, they came in. And then eventually it became a diversified farm. And finally, with a little bit of irrigation, it became a monoculture with cotton. All that developed slowly from 1865, 1870 up into after the turn of the century. And by 1915, cotton was dominating this part of the country. Of course, cattle still dominates the Panhandle, and cattle still dominates the Big Bend. Those farmers and those people who raised a few cattle and then some crops, they attracted townspeople. And as townspeople came in, we needed doctors and lawyers and newspaper people and others. And so small towns began. And if you look in 2018, you look today, a lot of those towns in West Texas are disappearing. And a lot of that had to do with, well, we raised larger and larger farms, which put people out of the small towns and the rural areas. As for economics, Lubbock is the center of a huge cotton industry. We raise more cotton in this general area than any place in the United States, and cotton really fuels Lubbock, just as oil fuels the life of Midland and Odessa in West Texas. A difference between them is our cotton is pretty stable. The price may fluctuate, but we still continue to raise a lot of cotton. Midland and Odessa, the oil has a boom and bust culture to it and economics to it. And people who have lived there a long time, they understand that during the boom, they better save some money for the bust. But people who came in during the boom, when the bust came, they had to leave. And so both those cities have a up and down population and a rising and falling economy. That's unlike Lubbock and Amarillo. I suspect another thing that keeps us going is the military presence. We've got several air bases in West Texas that are big ones, and that impacts us in many ways. But then there's also a military presence in the sense of, like, El Paso has a huge Fort Bliss, and so we've got that kind of thing. That, you know, it was military presence that really boomed Fort Worth, and in some ways it boomed Lubbock when the airport came in during World War I, a military airport, that is. So those things are all factors that dominate the economy. But West Texas has also a lot of colleges. We've got a huge one here at Texas Tech, 38,000 students, I think, as of this spring. I mean, that impacts us a lot too, and medical facilities in West Texas and Lubbock are, well, especially Lubbock, medical facilities dominate our city, for goodness sakes. We have people coming from all over West Texas to receive treatment in Lubbock. The society and culture of West Texas is pretty diverse. It's dominated, I suppose, in the larger cities by the local colleges. It's dominated likewise in the large cities by the big churches, conservative traditions pretty much. The society is conservative. We have a lot of NRA members in this area, as National Rifle Association members in this area, as might be expected. You go out in the country, you drive out in the country, you'll see a lot of pickups with the rifles in the back by the window. A lot, but not everyone, of course. I drive a pickup myself. There's no gun in my house or in my car. But anyway, society is pretty conservative. Look, we had laws until recently that wouldn't allow for liquor to be purchased within many of the cities. Yeah, that suggests how conservative society and really the culture is around here. Whatever liberalism is, it's associated with the universities and colleges of West Texas. There are a lot of reasons why one should know their own history. You know, you get a sense of your own place, you get a sense of your own time and your own background, your own roots by knowing your history. And not only is there a sort of importance in knowing those kind of things, there's also a joy in knowing about your past. Genealogy is very popular in this country, and it seems to be more and more popular. Well, history is sort of genealogy, and it's interesting as well as important to know some of that past. You get a sense of yourself, as I said, and a sense of place. This book grew from a conference of West Texas Historical Association. A number of historians were there, and one of the panels during that conference was on history in West Texas. That is, why has history in West Texas been ignored, and what can we do about it? Well, out of that conference grew our book, West Texas, A History of the Giant Side of the Strait. And so we gathered up a number of our friends and colleagues to write it. All of them are West Texans, all of them are familiar with the history. But largely West Texas has been ignored because most of the historians in the state live in the eastern part of the state and not out here. And besides, in the history departments where the real intellectual history, so to speak, is to be done, most of that is done in the history departments. And a lot of those members, they write about Europe. They're European historians, Asian historians. They didn't care about West Texas history or Texas history. And so that reduced the number as well. But anyway, we got a number of West Texas historians who are interested not only in writing about U.S. history, but about Texas history. We got them to write about West Texas history. And if I say so myself, they did a pretty darn good job.